Hi, everyone. Welcome to National Brain Tumor Society's Defeating Glioblastoma virtual town hall. It's an honor that you're here today, and we're here all together. Thank you. And we're honored to have such an outstanding panel to discuss glioblastoma, including de novo glioblastomas, or GBMs, and those gliomas that may metastasize into glioblastoma. Where we are, where we need to be, is what we're talking about today. And of course, what it will take for us to turn this new decade into the first decade where we see hopefully more dramatic survival benefits and survival rate declines similar to other cancers through the development of new and better treatments. The panel leaders represent different perspectives, but we're all united in our efforts to improve treatments, to create cures and quality of life for glioblastoma patients and families. Thank you to the elected officials who have led the way with the Senate and the House resolutions, including Senators Graham, Warren, Markey, McSally, Sinema, McConnell, and Representatives Mast, Gallagher, Langevin, and Schakowsky. They all came together in a bicameral, bipartisan fashion to advance companion resolutions to raise awareness for Glioblastoma Awareness Day. Thank you. I would also like to express our sincere gratitude to our sponsors on this important day for the GBM community. Thank you to IMVAX, Black Diamond Therapeutics, Novacure, Bracewell, Immunomic Therapeutics, Society for Neuro-Oncology, Karyopharm Therapeutics, Yale Medicine Therapeutic Radiology and Yale Cancer Center, Kazia Therapeutics, the Cleveland Clinic, GT Medical Technologies, the Colony Group, Inovio Pharmaceuticals, University of Texas MD Anderson Cancer Center, VBI Vaccines, Foundation Medicine, Mayo Clinic, and Moderna. Thank you all. As we get started, thank you to all who are listening and participating virtually in this town hall, and a special thank you to all the healthcare providers, administrators, regulators, caregivers, and all those who are delivering care to patients during this pandemic. You are so important. We appreciate what you're doing. We know that even amidst these challenging times, the crisis of glioblastoma and other brain tumors does not stop. Now, we have a great session planned for you over the next hour, and I'm excited to hear what all the panelists have to say. With that, let me introduce Dr. Patrick Wen, Professor of Neurology at Harvard Medical School and Director of the Center for Neuro-Oncology at Dana-Farber Cancer Institute. He is the immediate past president of the Society for Neuro-Oncology and former editor-in-chief of Neuro-Oncology. His research interests span novel therapeutics for brain tumors, novel clinical trial design and response assessment, and endpoints in clinical trials. And he chairs the National Brain Tumor Society's Medical Advisory Board. Dr. Wen is a true patient advocate, and we're so grateful that he's here today to introduce our moderator. Thank you, Dr. Wen.
Thanks so much, David. We're very grateful to Congress for establishing this Glioblastoma Awareness Day, and to David and the National Brain Tumor Society, and all the other patient organizations and the patients themselves who advocated for this. And we're also grateful for the support of the National Cancer Institute and the FDA. As you know, glioblastomas are the most common malignant primary brain tumor, with over 13,000 cases diagnosed each year in the United States. Although there has been a lot of work, progress has been unacceptably slow, and we need to do much better. Hopefully, this Glioblastoma Awareness Day will increase recognition of this problem and bring more resources and new ideas to help us develop better therapies. This year, patients unfortunately have to deal not only with the diagnosis of glioblastoma, but also the COVID pandemic, the economic crisis, and issues related to racial disparity. Although these issues have turned our world upside down, it also allows us to look at problems with a fresh view and see what really works and what doesn't. And hopefully this will allow us to reimagine the way we do things and help us to find novel and creative ways to take care of patients with glioblastomas and find better treatment. We're very fortunate to have Eric Lipton moderate today's town hall. Eric has been an investigative journalist for 30 years, mainly with the New York Times, covering topics ranging from September 11th attack to Hurricane Katrina to the COVID pandemic. In particular, he's had a strong commitment to bringing transparency to the process of government. For his reporting, Eric has been awarded 3 Pulitzer Prizes. I met Eric in 2004 when I had the privilege of looking after Sister Michelle, who fought her diagnosis of glioblastoma for 8.5 years with tremendous courage and grace. And along every step of her journey, she had the most wonderful, loving support from Eric and his amazing family. I know that Eric is very passionate about helping to find better treatments for glioblastomas, and we're very grateful that he is here to moderate the town hall. Eric.
Yes, thank you so much. And it's a privilege to be moderating this event with such an accomplished group of people participating and folks who have the ability to make such a fundamental difference in the lives of so many people. As Dr. Wen mentioned, I've known him for 15 years, since 2004, when I first met through my sister in not particularly good circumstances. He's a soft-spoken person, but incredibly wise and determined. And I often think about Dr. Wen and the extraordinary perseverance that's necessary to work in this field. Progress is so slow, but it only happens through perseverance. And I think that we have to remember that. I'm amazed that the ability to stay so focused for so long on something so challenging and to maintain an enthusiasm that's necessary. And as Dr. Wen mentioned, and it's sort of obvious to us all, this is an extraordinarily difficult year and a reminder of how fragile life is and how powerful nature is, and even how in advanced modern societies we can be so vulnerable. And for glioblastoma, I think this year is also a reminder of how the global medical community can come together to focus on an important threat, and in this case, coronavirus. The pace of the progress in identifying possible coronavirus vaccines, with HHS announcing just today, a contract with Pfizer and BioNTech worth $2 billion to manufacture vaccines. It stands as a model of how quickly the medical world can move when resources and coordination and a sense of mission are all in line. And I think that that's something that I want to discuss a bit today with the various folks on the panel, just about how a coordination and unified efforts can really make a difference. And I think we all need to acknowledge up front that the pace of progress over the last decade with glioblastoma has been disappointing. And by acknowledging that, we can perhaps examine why the progress hasn't been as fast as many from the researchers to the families would like. And it's not a question about hard work or the dedication of the people like Dr. Wen or Dr. Chang or all the others in this field. But I do wonder structurally if there are better ways to organize the work. And maybe that's something we can talk about some today with the various guests. So, let's turn to our panel. Each of the participants is going to give a short sort of this talk themselves for 4 or 5 minutes, and then after their opening remarks, each of them one at a time, I'm going to ask some questions. And just to go through the order of people that are speaking, we're starting with Dr. Susan Chang, the director of University of California, San Francisco, Neuro-Oncology, internationally recognized leader in the field of neurological malignancies. She's been involved in more than 20 active clinical trials that evaluate a wide spectrum of therapeutical treatments. We have Dr. Ned Sharpless, the director of the National Cancer Institute for nearly 3 years now, and previously the director of University of North Carolina, Lineberger Comprehensive Cancer Care. He also served as the acting commissioner of the FDA during part of last year. Next up is Dr. Rick Pazdur, the director of the FDA's Oncology Center of Excellence, which attempts to apply the skills of the FDA's regulatory scientists to accelerate novel cancer products. He's been at the FDA for an extraordinary 20 years and 40 years as a practicing oncologist. That's an extraordinary commitment to public health, and we all really appreciate that. It means a lot to everyone here, and we just thank you for 20 years at the FDA. It's extraordinary. And then we have our friend David Arons, who you've already spoken some, who's the chief executive of the National Brain Tumor Society. And finally, we have Adam Hayden, a father of 2 young boys, who was diagnosed in the spring of 2016 with glioblastoma. He received his graduate degree in philosophy, focusing on the philosophy of science in 2017 after his diagnosis. And he now blogs about living with cancer and is a frequent speaker on the topic. So those are the people who are going to give the remarks. And let's start with Dr. Chang, and each of you are going to give sort of a 4 or 5 minute commentary, and then we're going to turn to questions. So Dr. Chang, please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Eric, and thank you to the NBTS for the opportunity to participate in this town hall and for your efforts to raise awareness of the urgent need to advance treatments for glioblastoma. We all know what we're dealing with here. It's a highly malignant tumor. It unfortunately remains incurable, and the average survival is about 15 to 18 months in general. And despite initial treatment having some control over the tumor, it inevitably recurs, and we are only dealing with about 10% of patients who survive 5 years or more. Optimal care requires the expertise of many specialists working as a single team who can provide the necessary skills and the state-of-the-art surgical instrumentation for maximal safe removal, radiation treatment, chemotherapy, tumor treating fields, and clinical trials. Over the last 10 years, the overall landscape of glioblastoma treatment and research has evolved, and the biggest impact has probably come from the advances in genetic and molecular biology. We all know that there are several subgroups of glioblastoma defined by different molecular features, and knowing this subgroup may change a patient's treatment course or prognosis. Another way that molecular biology has played an important role in identifying the different mutations that are possible within a single tumor. We hope to use this information to develop treatments that are based on the individual tumor's unique genetic makeup, targeting several mutations at once, instead of this one-size-fits-all single drug approach, which we've used in the past and really has not been a successful strategy thus far. A better understanding of how the tumor alters the surrounding brain tissue has also added treatment options. So, for example, is the development of bevacizumab that targets the formation of abnormal blood vessels caused by glioblastoma, which also reduces swelling in the brain. And this agent has been shown to slow progression of disease and improve symptoms. In the next decade, we need to continue investment in understanding the basic mechanisms of the biology that is unique to glioblastoma. Scientific progress is now beginning to intersect with and be propelled by the transformative technological advancements of our time. And in the next few years, we expect this intersection to yield fundamental discoveries across the neurosciences. We need to engage and support young, talented investigators who have an interest in the neurosciences in order to focus their attention on glioblastoma. Despite the fact that immunotherapy strategies have worked in other cancers, this is still elusive for glioblastoma patients. But there are many scientists who are studying the specific barriers to applying immunotherapy to brain tumors, and harnessing the immune system in conjunction with other modalities could be a huge leap forward in the treatment of glioblastoma. Ultimately, improved outcome will only be realized through the translation of scientific findings to the patient by efficient design and conduct of clinical trials. And these studies need to address the problem of the blood-brain barrier, which limits the delivery of effective concentration of agents that can get to the tumor. We also need to incorporate earlier assessment of whether a treatment is working or not, so we can then direct resources to the development of effective treatments faster. And most importantly, we always have to keep in mind the critical balance of treatment efficacy with side effects and quality of life. Finally, strength in numbers is another opportunity for progress. International collaboration and shared information about tumor biology, population science, clinical trials, big data analysis, and sophisticated modeling using artificial intelligence can all be harnessed to accelerate new treatments. The NCI's investment in a Glioblastoma Therapeutics Network Award will be key to the rapid and efficient evaluation of novel agents across multiple institutions. We cannot do this without the partnership with the FDA and industry, and most importantly, the alliance with our patients. Engaging the patient community is critical to enhance participation in clinical trials and to understand the impact of our treatment on patients and families. I would like to thank the NBTS for their commitment to this call to action of advancing treatment for glioblastoma, and only together can we hope to make a real difference in the fight against this disease. Thank you for the opportunity to participate in the town hall today.
Next up is Dr. Sharpless. Please go ahead. Thank you.
Sure. I'd like to thank the NBTS for the opportunity to speak today. It's great to join everyone on GBM Awareness Day. I'm aware of the history of this day and how it came about, and I think I want to commend everyone involved for getting the congressional interest and the community interest in this important topic. Events like this are really important to re-energize the community and so that we can join together and make progress in a disease where progress has been elusive. Patrick, in the opening, mentioned two topics, the work that the NIH is doing to promote racial equity in research and address cancer disparities or health disparities, as well as the effect of the pandemic on research. Those are both issues that are taking a tremendous amount of my time presently and things that are the NCI is intensely focused. I don't plan to talk about those much today given my limited time, but I'd be happy to take questions on the topic if there are any. But really, given the limited time I have, I wanted to focus on the NCI's efforts in glioblastoma, where there have been a few new items that are worth talking about. This is first off a disease where we need better research, we need a better basic understanding of the disease, we need a more nimble clinical trials framework, and we need to see progress for our patients and their loved ones. One of the most important new initiatives in this regard is the Glioblastoma Therapeutics Network. This was recently announced at one of our joint board meetings, and this is to establish a national clinical trials network that will do things a bit differently from the way we've done in the past. I think many of those of you on the phone remember the history of this effort. It started with a meeting, I believe, in the Reagan Building in the International Trade Center, where we got together a number of thought leaders to really try and understand why clinical trials in glioblastoma had been less successful than we would have liked. And we heard a lot about the need to have better credentialing of preclinical models and the better preclinical validation of therapies before they go into patients. And then once they are tested in humans, better understanding of their pharmacology and their pharmacodynamics in the patient, and requiring using things like research biopsies and repeat biopsies and novel imaging to assess response. And we heard you, and then we followed up with these concerns through a working group that was impaneled to advise the translation, our committee on clinical advice, and that provided a number of recommendations that have now been enacted through this new funding announcement. And that announcement is now going forward, and we will be eager to set up this new network that I think will provide a more nimble and more research-based framework for the testing of novel therapeutics in patients with glioblastoma. Two other initiatives I mentioned very quickly. There's a Glioblastoma Care Initiative, which is a cellular analysis of resistance and evolution, which is a single cell effort to really understand the basic biology of glioblastoma by studying the genomic, epigenomic, and immunologic characteristics of adult tumors. And then a matched project called Project Hope, which is similar in pediatric and young adult patients. And I think these sorts of basic science efforts, as I mentioned, are crucial for this disease, where I believe our lack of understanding of the cancers has been limiting. A few other things to mention: we have recently expanded access to our proteomic and phosphochromic studies in adult glioblastoma, building on our Cancer Genome Atlas data, and these sorts of basic science resources have been very important for the community in research. And then I think the work of the NCI intramural program in neuro-oncology is probably very familiar to this group, with leaders like Mark Gilbert and Ken Aldapi and Terry Armstrong. And so I think that the intramural program is intensely focused on novel approaches to neuro-oncology and work in that regard. So suffice it to say, the NCI has a lot of interest in this disease. This is an area where we would like to see progress, and we need to see more progress. And I think the collective action of the leadership of this group and of Congress and of patients and their families, we can together find some hope in this disease where hope has been in short supply. Thank you again for the opportunity to come today, and I look forward to further discussion.
Thank you. Yeah, next up is Dr. Pazdur.
Thank you very much. I want to emphasize that I think this is a very difficult time for patients with cancer, regardless of what type of cancer they have. And we at the FDA, and especially in the Oncology Center of Excellence, have been having several listening sessions with patient groups, including your group, to hear what their issues are. And one resounding issue that has always come up is we don't want to be forgotten in this pandemic. And not only are patients with cancer facing unique challenges that they normally do in the treatment of their disease, but this has to be overlaid in the area of this pandemic, where really the medical system has been thrown into, let's face it, turmoil. That being, we at the FDA have made a concerted effort to maintain stability. And if you take a look at our approvals since the pandemic began, we've approved many, many drugs for the treatment of cancer on time or before their due dates. And this emphasizes that we want patients to understand that we are here for them. We have also looked at traditional cancer drugs and looked at different dosing schedules to allow less frequent doctor visits, administration schedules, so there is less contact with the medical community to prevent any exposure to COVID viruses. But the underlying score here, or theme, is we want people to understand, and especially our constituency, which is patients with cancer, that we are here for them. We have not forgotten you. And I think that is a major issue here in the United States. And as again, during our listening sessions that we've held with not only your group, but many of the other disease advocacy groups, this was a common theme that has been expressed. I think has been stated by other speakers, we are all aware of the fact that there has not been a great deal of progress in the treatment of brain tumors. And one of the areas that I would like to talk about, and here again, it goes back to my 40 years of experience in the field of oncology, is to take a look at that career and see tumors that when I began had very little or no treatment, and how they have been transformed and why have they been transformed. And let me tell you just about a few of them. For example, when I began my career in 1979, the only treatment for the disease of multiple myeloma was melphalan and prednisone. And patients used to basically succumb to that disease within a 2-year period of time. Over the past 10 years, because of a greater understanding of the targets in that disease, we have transformed the median survival, or the survival of patients, and many of patients are living now decades. And we've approved over 10 therapies for this disease that have been used either as single agents or in combinations. This is not the only success story. There are many success stories, and they underpin one common theme, and that is we have a better understanding of the disease. For example, in lung cancer, when I started out in 1979, there were 2 types of lung cancer: small cell lung cancer, non-small cell lung cancer. Well, that is not true here in the year 2020. We have multiple different types of cancer based on molecular markers, subdividing lung cancer into smaller pots, so to speak, but pots that have greater efficacy. And I emphasize to the staff, and have talked publicly about this, we are not talking about at the FDA whether or not we should approve a drug many times. Because of the great efficacy that we're seeing in these subpopulations of patients, we're asking how quickly we can expedite the delivery of those drugs to the American public. Again, an underlying theme is understanding the disease, then developing drugs to target our understanding of the molecular basis of that disease. Another major breakthrough that has occurred over the past decade has been the development of tumor immunology, in particular drugs such as PD-1 drugs, which has really transformed many diseases, particularly lung cancer and a whole array of tumors. And I think it's important for us, again, to understand that this didn't just happen by chance. It happened because we had a good understanding of the immune system and were able to really capitalize on investments that the NCI made over decades to understand the immune system, and then target drugs and develop drugs based on that basic understanding. I think that there have been many advances in many diseases, and I think that, here again, we all would like to see the development of new drugs in this disease, and we have been very active with pharmaceutical companies at the FDA in discussing development programs. The basic theme, though, is a basic understanding of the disease. Is the disease the same in each person? How does the disease vary on a molecular basis? How does our body react to that disease, i.e. the tumor immunology of the disease? And I think as we develop greater understanding of these principles, we will see major therapeutic advances in this disease. Here again, in the diseases that I mentioned, for example, myeloma, melanoma, there was a great deal of pessimism 40 years ago, 30 years ago, 20 years ago. In melanoma, the only drug that was available was what I called a toxic placebo, DTIC. Now we have biological therapies of checkpoint inhibitors, as well as targeted therapies that have transformed that disease on a patient level, on an individual basis. We at the FDA are also devoting a considerable amount of resources in developing new tools at assessing the disease and how the patient reacts to a therapy, patient assessment of toxicities, as well as the patient assessment of how they benefit from that disease. I hope I gave you just a brief glimpse of what I consider the major issues here in the treatment and the future treatment of brain tumors in general. And I really do thank the organization for inviting me here. And I'm really very eager to participate with my colleagues here to have a really discussion on where we're going in this disease. Thank you again.
Thank you. Let's go on to David Arons now from the National Brain Cancer Institute.
Thanks, Eric. Thanks so much. And thank you to all the panelists and formally to the NCI, the FDA, for collaborating on numerous occasions with National Brain Tumor Society to help develop glioblastoma strategies, to look at imaging and endpoints and all the things that need to be tackled, innovative clinical trial design, things that we all need to really work on together to try to make progress for glioblastoma and all brain tumor types, ultimately for patients and families. For the last 30 years, National Brain Tumor Society and its origin groups have been all in to defeat glioblastoma. We unrelentingly invest in and unite the brain tumor community to discover, cure, deliver effective treatments, and advocate for patients and their care partners. The last decade, as Dr. Chang described, we really got to know glioblastoma in whole new ways as a disease and really make discoveries for the first time, whether it's in cholesterol or nutrient uptake. We learned more targets than ever before. Finally, we could sort of look under the hood of the car that glioblastoma is and try to figure out the vulnerabilities and attack the engine of glioblastoma for the first time, and give a lot of credit to the NIH and the Cancer Genome Atlas Project for sequencing GBM, sequencing glioblastoma, and kicking off a decade of progress. Now, this new decade really needs to be about capitalizing on the last decade, while continuing, as Dr. Pazdur said, to continue to better understand this disease. But we need to take some shots on goal. And there are really four things that our community can do to come together in terms of getting resources, leveraging collaboration, participation by patients in research, and advocacy. So while population statistics have been largely unchanged, we also see anecdotal evidence that patients respond differently to different treatments. And indeed, each patient is a statistic of one. With the kind of opportunities that biotechs and biopharmas and research labs in hospitals and universities are bringing forward, and new innovative clinical trials like GBM Agile, that creates an opportunity. with the NCI developing an innovative approach to glioblastoma drug development through the forthcoming Glioblastoma Therapeutics Network, taking on the heterogeneity challenge with advanced genomic sequencing and single-cell sequencing, as Dr. Sharpless mentioned, that gives us an opportunity. Collaborations with organizations involved in this event and others like Society for Neuro-Oncology, International Brain Tumor Alliance, and others that help bring forward research, that's an opportunity to make progress. With the FDA working hand in hand with us and so many others to improve those endpoints. How do we realize better endpoints that could reveal the kind of benefit that a drug might have for a brain tumor? We're not searching to get drugs that aren't safe and effective approved. What we do need are measures capable of revealing benefit that they might have and establishing clinical benefit if it's there. And the FDA has been creative and helpful on that and continues to be, particularly during COVID. We're grateful for their participation. Congress, of course, has been stepping up to increase funding for medical research and for the NIH and the NCI each year, as well as funding through the Defense Department's Cancer Research Program that also funds brain tumor research. And by raising the profile on days like Glioblastoma Awareness Day, there's more than just hope. There's a national strategy emerging for glioblastoma. Patients and families contributing time, dollars, tissue, which starts the research process, and their participation in clinical trials. A couple of years ago, we did a survey of how many brain tumor patients and families were even aware of what clinical trials are, and sadly, only 36% responded that they knew of clinical trials, let alone had the opportunity to get into them. We need to raise the level of understanding of what clinical trials are, what clinical trials might be available for brain tumor patients, and do more to get patients into appropriate clinical trials for them. NCCN guidelines over the last 2 years have said that oftentimes cancer patients receive their best care in a clinical trial. We have to take advantage of that and try to marry up good care with good research. With strong dedication to addressing health disparities in this country and growing recognition that by addressing health disparities, it can also help treatment development and help patients. We need to improve the kinds of programs we have to address those upstream challenges that create disparities in healthcare. And we're so pleased the NCI and FDA are working on that as well with other funders. Nonprofit funders make important research grants, and there are so many other nonprofits in addition to National Brain Tumor Society participating in GBM Awareness Day today as well. And we thank them for all of their philanthropy and by getting involved. We have to do more than just attack GBM when it's de novo. We need to also fund work that can lead to a glioblastoma, and that's why we're funding glioblastoma research, but also that in lower grade gliomas as well to help stop them in their tracks before they metastasize. With all of this work together, we not only have hope, there is an emerging national and international strategy against glioblastoma. We need to bring some of these work streams together, collaborate perhaps even more effectively, but we're starting to see the barriers and opportunities with much more clarity. And so if there's some take-home messages, would be, please, if you're diagnosed, it's really important to know your tumor and get involved, as Dr. Chang said, this era of molecular understanding, to get involved and to advocate and join with us, and to know that National Brain Tumor Society, the FDA, the NCI, universities like UCSF, and the other patient advocacy groups, we're open and we want to help. We want to help you get to the best care possible and to be part of the research process so that we can all make a difference against glioblastoma together.
Okay, and thank you, David. And now, Adam Hayden, please go ahead.
Great, thanks so much, Eric. Thanks to these esteemed panelists. I'm honored to serve beside them. Thanks also to National Brain Tumor Society. You know, we've heard about immunotherapeutics and things like this that can sometimes be complicated. Let me make it pointed. I'm 38 years old. This is my life. I'm a young dad. Whitney, my wife, and I have 3 young boys. Our youngest was 8 months old when I was diagnosed. Whitney and I read books about child development milestones. Candidly, we wonder when our youngest's memory will be good enough to make sure that my life is threatened by glioblastoma. Can we count on him to remember his dad? That is the type of urgency that we're up against with glioblastoma. You know, I was in an inpatient rehabilitation facility after my surgery where I had to recover the activities of daily living after an aggressive surgery to remove as much tumor as possible. I was a wheelchair user, very limited use of my left arm and hands. I couldn't bathe, feed myself, dress myself, something that I learned going through this inpatient rehab experience with other folks with neurodegenerative diseases, with traumatic brain injury, brain tumors. You learn really quickly that we need each other. That folks in those vulnerable populations, myself included, I cannot do this on my own. No single patient can. It requires not only our family of loved ones, an extensive medical team that is coordinating care, but also about policies that put research money in the right institutions, that provide the right support services for families like me, dealing with the financial toxicity of care. So it takes everybody together. We know some of the splashy headlines about the folks who have died from glioblastoma, and we know that it affects both sides of the aisle. I felt especially close to Senator John McCain. I penned an open letter to him, and though we are different in so many ways, that brought us together. So we can find unity through tackling this disease. So it takes everybody, and the time is now. You heard David Arons speak about what we've done in the past decade and where we're going in the next decade. The time is now to act with urgency. The reality is, for most of us patients out here, we're measuring our expectation in months. That's where we're at. When we really think blue sky in a patient community, we talk about turning this disease into a chronic and manageable condition. We want to ultimately deliver on a cure. But right now, in candid, real talk, we're just trying to live years with the disease. So there is urgency, and it does take everybody. And it affects, regardless of political affiliation, age, gender, race, ethnicity, background. This is a disease that is an indiscriminate killer. And I'm enthusiastic, though, to see GBM Day come together and bring together government agencies terrifically represented by Drs. Sharpless and Pazdur, who I can back up. The listening sessions and the working groups, they are happening, and patients are included. I've been included there. So they're not blowing smoke. They're serious. But it's going to take continued cooperation from those government agencies, from researchers, from clinicians, from patient advocacy organizations from around the U.S. So I'm enthusiastic to see GBM Day happen and bring together these groups, and it's something that must spark action for the future. So I'm here, the face of glioblastoma, to try to drive the point about urgency home today. Let's join together. Let's begin to make inroads into this disease. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you, Adam, and for your perseverance and willingness to give your time to focus on the disease. It's so important in the midst of such a family challenge that you're facing. So we're going to go on to questions now, and we have about 4 minutes for each individual that I'm going to go through one at a time and ask a couple of questions. We'll see how far we can get. I'm going to start with Dr. Chang, and the first question for Dr. Chang is, at the end of this decade, what is the research question that you hope gets answered, and why, with respect to glioblastoma?
Thank you, and thank you so much, Adam, for your impassioned plea for action. It really makes a huge difference to everyone to hear your personal story, so thank you for that. I think we've heard so much about how the biology of this disease is really the way that understanding that is how we're going to move forward. And one of the big questions that I have as well is, how can we translate the understanding of the driver mutations of glioblastoma? So we know that there's some underpinnings that really are key to the formation of these tumors and keeps them alive. And so can we then target that? Because if we can do that effectively, that is pretty much the epitome of a personalized medicine approach, where the goal is to effectively treat the tumor and spare the normal tissue. All of our other treatments so far, surgery, radiation, chemotherapy, is really just where it affects normal tissue as well. And so you have to worry about the side effects of those types of strategies. If we can truly identify something that is unique to the tumor, and can we target that effectively, that I think is going to be one of the advances that we can hope for.
And what do you think is the greatest barrier to translating the advances that we've seen in molecular genetics and the biology of glioblastoma into actual new treatments and medicines for patients? What is the thing what do you have to cross in order to pull that off, do you think?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think, one of the challenges is how do we feel confident that by targeting specific pathways with specific drugs is going to make a difference for our patients. And what we're lacking currently are really the preclinical modeling that recapitulates the disease, that allows us to test in a larger way these different drugs and these different modalities, that we can then say, okay, we've got a really good signal that this is what we want to take into the patient. I think the NCI's commitment to the Glioblastoma Therapeutics Network, where we're engaging scientists, pharmacologists, PD, pharmacodynamics, all of this type of work into modeling what we think is going to work in the patient, and then validating that in early trials in the patients, I think is really where I'm hoping that we see that barrier of breaking through all the work that's being done in the labs by these dedicated scientists. How do we get that really to the patient in a way that we feel confident that we can move forward effectively?
Okay, thank you so much. I'm going to move on to Dr. Sharpless now. And we all know the statistics in terms of life expectancy for those diagnosed with glioblastoma, and that there are a few drugs that are approved. What would you say is, if you were to kind of break it down into 2 or 3 specific things that you're trying to do at the National Cancer Institute to change the way that research is done around glioblastomas that can potentially accelerate progress? I mean, what are the specific things? And you've talked about the new initiative that's underway, but maybe you can explain that perhaps in a layman's way, just to walk through some of the things you hope that you can turn to make things happen faster.
Sure. Before I came to the National Cancer Institute, the therapeutics paradigm for clinical trials in glioblastoma kind of worked like this. It was take drugs that didn't have great data to support their use in human testing, but maybe worked in some other cancer or has sort of plausible mechanism of action, give them to patients in a small phase 2 trial, not see responses in 30 or so patients, publish that failed trial and move on to the next, and repeat, rinse and repeat. And we saw many of those trials, and the patients weren't benefiting, and we weren't developing a new understanding of the disease, and we weren't even learning why they were failing. So, was it because the drug didn't get into the tumor? There's this whole issue of the blood-brain barrier. Was it because the whole paradigm of the trial was bad because the target really wasn't valid, for whatever reason? So, boy, did the NCI hear about this. When I first started as NCI director in 2017, I was besieged in a good way by people like David Arons and others who are interested in this disease, saying, the NCI has to rethink what it's doing. Those kinds of trials aren't helping patients, and we're not seeing the progress we'd like. And I think this view was widely shared by the clinicians running those trials themselves, as Dr. Chang mentioned. So we, listened and thought and got a lot of feedback through the process I described. And, I think all of you are aware the NCI has some process, and we have to do things in an orderly way to make sure we're dispersing federal monies in a thoughtful and careful way. But at the end of that process, we realized we needed to have better scientific understanding of the things we're going to test. So more basic science, more preclinical models, more validation of targets. And then when we test therapies in humans, we have to really understand what they're doing. We have to understand not just if they work, but if they fail, why did they fail? And that may require things we haven't done traditionally, like repeat biopsies and developing new kinds of imaging that aren't available today. And so that might require some innovation as well. But I think what we're trying to send the signal is any good idea, any new approach, any out-of-the-box way of treating this disease we'll consider, we'll fund, we'll advance, we'll work on, because I feel like most of the improvements we've seen have been too incremental, and we need a real advance in this disease, and that's what we're trying to find. And now we try to create that structure that'll allow that to happen.
All right, that sounds promising. I mean, I know as the brother of someone that had glioblastoma, just looking at all the clinical trials as we tried to evaluate all the options, there just was such an incredible range of things, and it did seem as if they were just sort of throwing things out there and trying them, and the patients were putting up hope but then without any clear idea as to whether or not it was going to result in a longer and quality of life and a longer life. And it's good to see that more effort to try to target that research on the most promising agents and do it in a more rational way. I mean, the next question is, in terms of pediatric brain tumors, or a leading cause of death in kids, including pediatric glioblastoma, I mean, what do you think it's going to take to change the course of pediatric brain tumors? And what's promising, and where are we going on that important challenge as well?
Yeah, I think it's a good time for the NCI to really commit to the study of pediatric malignancies in general, and try and make advances in this important population of patients. Where and it has to be said, there have been some great successes in pediatric oncology, but I don't think pediatric brain tumors has been one of them, and certainly an area where we can see more improvement. Now you're talking about a rare cancer, and so doing clinical trials and some of the things that the NCI likes to do are more challenging in this disease. And so one approach I'm enthusiastic about for pediatric brain tumors is really the new Childhood Cancer Data Initiative. That was an effort to fund and support really utilization of data better in these diseases, and the ability to amalgamate different data sources and really learn from every child with cancer. Because classical clinical trials are challenging, but we still have to get information about what's working and what isn't working throughout the entire course of disease, both at initial diagnosis and then treatment, and then relapse and recurrence that occur. And so I think that initiative, which is really just started in earnest with a report to joint boards about the vision of that the goals of that initiative, but we're less than a year into it. But I think that already we're seeing the commitment to the molecular understanding of every child's tumor, and then the gathering of data on those patients so that we can learn from them and provide better therapies. I think that's a paradigm that will pay off in lots of pediatric malignancies, including pediatric brain tumors.
Okay, thank you so much. And Dr. Pazdur, going to move on to you. And I mean, what advice do you have to the research community to kind of find a more successful way to do this research? I mean, from your many years of experience, I mean, what would be the words that you would offer to say, here's something that I think you could really take in account of to try to execute more effectively on your research goals?
I had to smile to myself as Ned was talking, because I came up with a term to describe this previous drug development, where we just took a drug, used a maximum tolerated dose, and then just gave it to a whole bunch of patients hoping to see something. And I termed this roulette wheel drug development, because it was just like spinning a wheel and hoping that you'd find the proverbial needle in the haystack, so to speak. And I think that has really turned out to be a non-productive approach, and we really moved away from that. And unfortunately, that approach prevailed in the 1980s, 1990s, and even now I see some of the drug companies still doing that. But I think the basic thing is understanding the disease. This is not a homogeneous disease. It is a heterogeneous disease. And understanding the heterogeneity of that, and what are the specific targets that would segment out different groups of patients to more druggable targets, so to speak. That's one avenue of research. And I think you could see from what's, again, going on in other diseases, for example, lung cancer, it becomes a big disease such as lung cancer has developed into a group of very small diseases, basically, but with drugs that have a great deal of efficacy, where you don't even need to do a randomized trial. It's so obvious because these patients have 50 or 60% response rates. you know the drug works, okay? It's obvious to you. So that's where I would hope that we would be able to go with this disease. And I don't think that that is insurmountable. And here again, using my historical perspective here, I fully remember how pessimistic for decades the lung cancer picture was, okay, with very few advances in that disease other than platinum doublet, so to speak. So yes, we do have a reason for optimism when we take a look at other diseases. I think we also should take a look and really try to understand what is unique in the GBM kind of ecosystem that we could take advantage from immunological therapies. Because I am, although a clinical trialist, I think the major advances are going to come in basic research here. What is unique about that system and how we could manipulate the immune system? After all, cancer really is an immunological disease. And most of our major public health advances have occurred through immunological therapies. For example, the polio vaccine, different vaccines that have occurred. And I think that we shouldn't just focus on targeted therapies, but take a look at the advances that we have seen again in other tumors, such as with the PD-1 drugs, such as with the CAR T cells, where we have really transformed diseases. Now, we at the FDA have also developed and pioneered tissue agnostic indications, looking at molecular markers and approving a drug just on the basis of molecular markers. We went on the limb to do that, and I think we have been very successful in convincing companies that this is a viable drug development pathway. And I really recommend or commend our team at the FDA for pursuing this. But that's the major issues, I think, is really taking a look at a disease that we say is a disease that appears to be homogeneous on light microscopy, but it ain't, okay? It ain't. So let's try to capitalize it and see what is different about individual patients.
Right. Okay, that's all very helpful. And again, I mean, just to relate back to my own experience, I don't know if researchers and drug companies realize that how the effect that the kind of the roulette approach, which I'm so glad to hear is sort of on the way out, has on families and the patients. Because the hope that comes, you get, oh, I'm in a clinical trial, the hope that they build, when they don't really realize that this is just a matter of, rolling the dice on an agent that perhaps works somewhere else, but actually there's little evidence behind it to suggest that it's going to be effective there. And it's so devastating to then find is, it doesn't actually work. You just go from one trial to another. That's terrible for the family. It also hurts their quality of life. So I'm so glad that you're moving away from that. It was really hard as a brother helping to try to pick some of those clinical trials when we had no idea. And so, I mean, the preclinical work really does seem important, and I hope there's sufficient funding to allow the selection of the agents to make the wise choices. I have to move on because we're starting to run out of time to Adam Hayden and to talk to you about. I mean, what would you say for those outside the glioblastoma community? What are the things that you've learned that you don't think that people realize enough and that they should know? What are some of the truths that you've really come to realize that are important for both physicians and families that are dealing with this disease to realize and to understand? Adam.
Yeah, terrific. Yeah, thanks so much. So I think there are I think three dimensions that I'd like to highlight, and oddly enough, we've heard some about the heterogeneity of glioblastoma. I'm going to address kind of the outer ring. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the collateral damage. I think the first thing to highlight for folks is that there is a tremendous amount of financial toxicity that comes with this disease. It's expensive. We spend a lot of money to treat this disease, and a lot of that comes out of our pocketbooks. In fact, for our family, we hit a deductible max for the surgery phase of my treatment. Shifting over to the radiation phase, our plan year started over. So that's just an example. We had to hit the max again. So I think amplifying the toxicity financially is important to know. So it's not only about your longevity and your health, it's also about are you going to afford the next home? Can you pay the rent? The second thing that I'm going to highlight also those in the glioblastoma community go for regular disease monitoring. So sometimes every 8 weeks, sometimes every 12 weeks, you go for an MRI. A scan, takes about an hour or so, but the hour you spend in the machine, sometimes you're waiting a couple of days for results. And there is a great deal of anxiety when you go to figure out, how is my tumor doing? Is it growing? Is it changing? Is it responding to treatment? So the anxiety from that, I think, points to these greater issues that you're not only dealing with sort of the day-to-day ins and outs of function as it's related to brain tumors, but there's also this whole kind of psychosocial model of distress that is about, how do you talk to your kids about cancer? How do you plan for the future when your life expectancy is uncertain, and this anxiety? So I think that's the important thing to highlight for folks. It's not just your physical health, it's this mental well-being that's impacted as well. The third point is really a celebration, because I think it's important not to lose sight of where we've done good things. The patient advocacy community for brain tumors, we often say it is the very best family that you never wanted to join. The advocacy organization, we know that it takes years to get preclinical data into translational medicine, into a clinical trial, into something we can market. I mean, years and years, 10 years, 12 years, 13 years sometimes to get a drug to market. So I'm out there, I'm on the Hill asking for more research funding. Will I be around in 13 years when we deliver on that research funding? I may not. Many advocates in the community advocate anyway, regardless. It may not benefit them directly. So I think really highlighting and celebrating the patient advocacy community is an important part of the glioblastoma experience. So those are three things that I think, Eric. So thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Adam. And let's go on to David Arons. Just from the patient advocacy perspective, I mean, what do you think needs to change? We've talked with the researchers and the funders and the administrators of these funds, but what, from a patient advocate perspective, what do you think needs to change to get more action and progress on glioblastoma?
I know our time is limited, but echo Adam's call for urgency, whether it's urgently getting patients to the right specialists as quickly as possible, setting up your care team at the individual level could not be more important, particularly with a care team that understands the molecular and genomic nature of this disease. It's not great for a glioblastoma patient to be seen by doctors that really dabble in glioblastoma. Really need to go to the best of those that focus on this disease. And then we need to take that urgency to the systemic level and do what we're doing like today, and getting all the right people working together to build the right programs that rapidly discover new ideas, rapidly qualify drugs in a systemic way, and create rapid clinical trials that determine safety and efficacy fast, so we can rule out the things that don't work quickly, and then graduate the things that are holding promise. Between 2013 and 2019, we saw about 8 phase 3 clinical trial failures in brain tumors, and they just didn't work. And different products didn't meet their primary endpoint for different reasons. But at the end of the day, these are large, expensive trials. And so to do the work that Dr. Sharpless is suggesting with a smaller early phase trials, to work with the FDA on how to do precision medicine better, this is the kind of work we need to do. But at the same time, we can't stop trying to learn about the disease at the biological and genomic level and bring all those new ideas forward. And to do that, we have to keep investing in the next generation of researchers who have some of those new cutting edge ideas to add to what the establishment has to offer. So we have to work very quickly to do this, because as Adam said, glioblastoma is measured in weeks, not years. We have to go fast.
I just want to close by coming back to Dr. Sharpless for a minute and asking, everyone cares about this so much, and each has a different reason why they really want to somehow see progress. But I mean, what, Dr. Sharpless, would you say to the public and to the families who have family members or individuals like Adam that have the disease? I mean, why should we be confident? I know this is sort of an impossible question to know the answer, but why do you think that we should be confident that we are going to see more progress in the coming decade than we have in the last decade? Because how would you explain that, your thought process around that?
I think that the thing I could say to any patient with cancer is that there's hope. We have seen amazing progress over the last 2 decades in areas where I never thought we'd see progress. Rick talked about myeloma and melanoma and lung cancer. And, GBM has turned out to be harder than some of the things. Other things that we thought were harder turned out to be easier. It's hard to predict, when this flash of lightning basic science advance is going to happen. But I am confident it's going to happen. If we stick with this problem, and we have a lot of great people involved, scientifically, wonderful surgeons and doctors and radiation oncologists and an outstanding team, I think we can expect and we'll see, actual advances in this disease. Congress is supporting us. The NCI wants to make progress. The FDA has taken an amazingly avant-garde regulatory stance. And by the way, kudos to Rick Pazdur on that. I think that has been tremendously great for patients. And that is not the uniform approach throughout the FDA. I can promise you there are a lot of people there who do not think like Rick in terms of this forward-thinking engagement for patients. And that's really made a difference in cancer. So I think, we're all in this together and motivated to see progress. And I think we will.
Okay, thank you so much. And maybe I'll just go back to David to close and thank everyone for participating. It's been a good conversation, and we all, have the same goal in mind. And let's hope that, 10 years from now, when we have the same conversation, we're at a different place. So David, do you have anything that you wanted to close with?
Just again, thank you so much to everyone being part of this panel discussion. Thank you, Eric, so much for moderating and for facilitating this conversation. And hopefully we can come back next year and talk about some progress that we made over the next 12 months that then will set up a decade of progress against glioblastoma. So again, thank you so much. Let's keep going and continue to advocate for the rest of Glioblastoma Day and the rest of the year. Thank you.